Chapter 4. University of the Be More Streets. My midnight forays to hang with my boyfriend at the 7-Eleven came to an abrupt halt in the fall of 1985, once the school year began. To this day, I cannot believe I kept that routine for much of the summer, considering the Baltimore City landscape at the time, which was far from the charmed description of Charm City. This is Baltimore, where you gots to be more careful. Don't get it twisted. This ain't Maryland. This is Murderland. By the mid to late 1980s, Baltimore was becoming known for having one of the most dangerous inner cities in the country per capita. This was especially true for kids my age, 14 and 15 years old, who were among the most likely in the country to be murdered by peers. Became the norm that a dude could get killed after simply stepping on someone's brand new sneakers, or not giving up their dookie chains or leather puff jackets. Don't think for a minute that girls were exempt from violence. One of my homegirls got stabbed to death with a kitchen knife in a family fight. Hair salons seemed like a common place for dudes in a jealous rage to gun down their girlfriends. We also got jacked if we were too fly in the wrong place at the wrong time. And let's not even start on the drug game and the treacherous murders that inspired. We'll get to that. Now, not every block of every street was a war zone, but there was nowhere that you could go and not be on guard. This was true of where Mommy and I lived after her divorce. The row house on Price Avenue that she was able to buy with a small down payment. Though it was in need of a lot of work, it was surrounded by nice homes of working class families. This was life now. This is what we had been given, and the streets of Bmore were an initiation. They surely prepared me for my future in ways I did not expect. To make your way, if you were young and black, the streets were unavoidable. The curriculum this university had to offer set you up to fail if you let it. The need to survive was a given, but for me, that wasn't enough. In my mind, I had to learn what it took to thrive. The University of the Be More Streets seemed to offer opportunity, a way to make it big, and for some, to be on top. I took to those streets to find my come up. After the double blows of my grandmother's death and Tony's departure, I was lost, in a state of mourning, and in need of a new sense of safety. It was now apparent that Adrian was in the throes of her addiction and was mostly unavailable, leaving me, for all intents and purposes, on my own. In my community, there was an epidemic of orphaned children and teens, maybe not in the traditional sense of orphan, but we had to figure it out without parental guidance. We had to grow up before our time. When I lost my virginity at age 14, not long after Marion died, I was probably the last of my girlfriends to do so. I remember there were girls in middle school having sex with grown men. We all grew up fast, wilding out in ways that adults in our lives never suspected. We might have been orphaned, but we had one another while trying to figure out life skills we needed to survive the concrete jungle we'd been given. We had to click up to help each other make it through. What I needed was a level of independence so I could create my own safety. Home no longer gave me that. The way forward, I decided right away, was to make my own money and my own rules. To do so, I had to learn the lay of the land. Ironically, in thinking this was how to keep myself safe, I walked closer and closer to the edges of danger, becoming addicted to the constant adrenaline rush. How did I manage this, you ask, as an only child of a street-savvy young mother? For one thing, in the aftermath of her mother's death and her divorce from Tony, Adrian was thrust into a state of deep grief that pushed her into becoming a full-fledged heroin addict. She had no one to answer to, no one to keep her accountable. And guess what? Because of her addiction, there was no one keeping me accountable either. There was a lot of trouble for me to find during the hours of her graveyard shift. On top of that, trouble had a way of finding me while I was just minding my own business. It is late summer or early fall at the beginning of the school year. Mom and I are sitting outside on the steps of our row house on Price Avenue. when one of my homeboys comes driving up in a brand spanking new red BMW M3. This homeboy is a little corny, but he is fun. With the music bumping hard, he rolls down the driver's window and calls to me, "Yo, what's up?" "Not much," I smile, throw his question back at him. "What's up?" "I got a new ride. Where you trying to go?" He smiles. The car is fly as hell, and I wouldn't mind being seen in it. There's a beat. By this time, one thing my mother knows is that I'm always on the go, whether I'm at school, hanging out at the skating rink, or at any one of my jobs, the record store or merry-go-round or the Gap, or just doing me. I look to my mother. "You were just saying you wanted some French fries from McDonald's. You want us to go and get you some?" "Who's he?" "He's just my homeboy. Do you want some French fries or not?" "Yeah, stop at the store and bring me a Pepsi," she says. "I'll be back." I hop off the porch and call out, "All right, take me to McDonald's real quick," and make a dash for his dope-ass car. In a flash, I'm in the car, sitting up front, window down, feeling fly as hell, mobbing. After a few minutes of hitting the main drag of Ricestown Road, woo, 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 here come the cops. From two directions, with lights flashing and sirens blaring. Next thing I know, my homeboy, who I will come to find out has picked me up in a MF'ing stolen car, guns the gas pedal and speeds off, launching us into a full-blown chase. This is the kind of shit you see in the movies, with a swarm of cops and helicopters chopping it up overhead. Now this dude is not fazed in the least, 'cause he's a car thief pro, I'd find out later. "What the fuck is going on? You gonna get us killed?" "No, I'm not," he shoots back calmly. He is calm. His being calm makes me believe he has a plan, and it's going to work. But we are in a full-on chase. I've never seen a car chase in the movies where the people actually get away. He manages to speed through traffic with such velocity and finesse that he somehow ditches the cops. Instead of finding some alley to hide in, too obvious, he pulls off into a residential cluster of streets that he races through like a stealth bomber. My heart is about to pound out of my chest when he pulls over and says, calm and steely, "Get out the car." I start to do as he says, and he adds, "Anybody asks, act like you're walking home from a friend's house after watching some movies." Well, by this point, I began to question his advice and was worried that I'd draw attention to myself as a little lost black girl in an all-white residential area. So fast on my feet, I took off running at full speed until I quickly scouted for a hiding spot behind a family home, down a flight of steps to a basement. No one could see me from any angle at the bottom of those stairs. After a bit, not hearing anything, I figured the coast was clear. Once I left the stairwell where I had been hiding, I walked cautiously through a couple of backyards until it looked safe for me to weave back onto the street. Once my feet hit the sidewalk, I regained my 14-year-old strut. Everything seemed cool until I got to the corner. Let me tell you, there is no jolt to the system like being a teenager who did nothing wrong, other than wanting to go get some fries, but finds a black and white police car waiting for you at the corner like a cobra about to strike. The next jolt was realizing that they must have had a police car at every corner of this residential area. Be cool, I told myself. I tried to act curious, walking right toward a waiting police car. Two cops approached me. One asked, "So where you coming from?" "I'm coming from a friend's house." "What friend?" I told them I'd been watching a movie at one of my girlfriend's houses. Real convincing. The second cop shook his head and leveled with me. "We got your friend." Of course I played it out, asking, "What friend?" Their attitude was, "The jig is up. We have your friend, and he told us everything, so you better not lie." My attitude was, "I don't know what you're talking about. I went to a friend's house." The officers sort of sighed as if I had forced their hand and put me in the back of a patrol car to go down to the station. The police station. The first person I saw when I walked in, looking glum, was, guess who? Homeboy didn't say a word. The cops took me over to a desk, sat me down, and asked, "Now do you want to tell us what happened?" "Officer," I said, telling the absolute truth, "I don't know anything. All I know is that he picked me up and we were going to McDonald's, and then the next thing I knew, we were being chased." They conferred and decided, unsurprisingly, I guess, to call my mother. A short time later, Mom showed up, annoyed as hell. But she believed me when I told her that I knew nothing, therefore had done nothing. The big lesson here was, don't ask questions. Ever. The less you know, the better. I found out only after the fact that this dude was a much sought-after car thief. What would I have said if I had known the car was stolen? Thank God I didn't know nothing. That kept me safe and helped me keep my homeboy's business out of my mouth when talking to the police. I truly had nothing to tell them. Note taken for this part of the curriculum. Truth be told, I was way more afraid of Adrian anyway. Come to find out, the police had been on my homeboy's neck for months. He had been in foster care and was now sent to juvie. He was simply another orphaned heart trying to graduate the University of the Bmore Streets. The police sent me home with my mother and offered their stern advice to be more careful about getting into random cars. Funny enough, the incident may have caused my mom to question me less for a time because I had done nothing wrong. This would not always be the case, not by a long shot. By the time I started ninth grade at Baltimore School for the Arts, I'd been attending the Twigs program there for about a year. This free after-school program was for students between 2nd and 8th grade who were hoping to gain experience in music, dance, theater, visual arts, and other creative disciplines. Every year, more than 1,000 art students auditioned for Baltimore School for the Arts, a pre-professional arts training high school with an academic component, and only 100 or so were admitted. As many as half of those who got in had gone to Twigs. Even though the school had only been in existence since 1979, the halls felt hallowed, being housed in two historic buildings, one of which was an old brownstone and the other the former Alcazar Hotel on the corner of Cathedral Street and Madison Avenue. The total enrollment was about 400 students, a relatively small student body for a Baltimore public school. And because we took most of our classes in our particular areas of focus, those were the fellow students we got to know most. Acting was always the thing that I most excelled at and seemed to be a viable professional path, although my passion for self-expression lent itself to a range of other interests. Whenever possible, I take every dance class I could. Modern, ballet, African, jazz, you name it. I loved visual arts too. Because voice, like movement, was so much a part of the actor's instrument, I managed to get vocal training as well. I was very lucky to have a special person early on who encouraged me to see my own possibilities. He was Donald Hicken, the head of the theater department. Donald was kind but firm, willing to go to bat for me when and if the situation warranted. There came a point, however, when I most surely began to test his patience. After he looked the other way too many times, as my attendance record increasingly left much to be desired. That point was when I basically went missing along with my schoolmate, Corey Washburn. We weren't actually missing at all. Corey and I had just decided that we should get ourselves to New York City because another BSA schoolmate, Josh Charles, was living there in his own apartment and everything as a full-on working professional actor. This was after he scored a small part in the John Waters movie, Hairspray, shot in Baltimore, though his breakout movie role would be a bit later in Dead Poets Society. It seemed like an excellent idea that we should head to New York to hang out with Josh and learn the ways of having a real deal gig in show business. Josh Charles, who may be best known for his stellar work as one of the leads of the TV series The Good Wife, was already cool as hell back then. He and I had been friends since elementary school. At age 9, Josh had swag and was the coolest white dude we knew. After attending different middle schools, he and I reunited at Baltimore School for the Arts. Early in high school, he started booking professional jobs as an actor and soon after left BSA to go live and work in New York, which to me was dope as hell. When I called Josh and asked, can Corey and I come to New York and hang? He, being who he was completely down to host us. We couldn't wait to see his New York City apartment and all the trappings of making it big. In our eyes, he was living the dream. The sticking point was what to tell my mother, who was starting to wonder how much I could be trusted, especially after I stole her rental car, a Ford Escort, when she was out of town one weekend. There was no malice or forethought, as in not premeditated. It was just that I needed some wheels to go to the skating rink. I was still in the ninth grade, and I had no license. I had driven only in a parking lot a few times with Tony, but I managed to drive the Escort through the streets and pick up my friend Warren, a senior who drove to pick up the rest of our friends. We went all the way to Crystal Skate Palace, a rink in Temple Hills, as far as you could go without leaving Maryland at the eastern border of D.C., where we skated and then dropped off everybody back at Warren's house. From there, I got behind the wheel and returned to Price Avenue without incident, except I didn't know how to parallel park. In a panic, I drove back to Warren's house, made him come home with me and parallel park the rental car and take the subway home. Phew. Not exactly. The first thing Adrian said when she returned home was, "Did someone move my rental car?" "What?" I acted cool, like, "How's that possible?" She seemed to accept that logic, but then, thinking it over, she shook her head saying, "I know that's not where I parked that car when I left." She let it go, but I realized I had to get smarter. So about a week before Corey and I planned to take the train to visit Josh, I brought the subject up. "Yeah, Ma, my class is taking a trip to New York, and we'll be gone for about 3 days. What's the trip for?" Without over-talking the subject, I explained that we were all going to be participating in an Alexander Technique workshop. It was really a brilliant cover story, if I did say so myself, because my mother didn't question any of the logistics, just gave me permission to go, and agreed to drop me at the train station at the appointed time. Once inside Baltimore's Penn Station, I spotted Corey, packed and ready, and we went to buy our tickets. Before we knew it, our Amtrak train was chugging off to New York City's Penn Station. What happened next is something of a blur. We definitely had fun for a day or so, hung with Josh, and walked the big city streets like we'd brushed shoulders with fame. Then, for some reason, the school happened to call my mother that day about my absence. They had never done this before, even though I was always skipping out on school. I have no clue why they chose that day. My mother explained my absence. "Oh, that's because she's with the rest of her class on the trip to New York to do the Alexander Technique workshop." She was promptly informed that there was no such trip. Adrian went ballistic. First thing she did was to call her sister Karen, screaming in a panic, "Jade is in New York by herself and I have no idea where she is." All hell broke loose. Mom was clear that I had lied to her and there was no trip. Her next mission was to locate me. Somebody got a message to somebody who rooted us out, and I eventually had to call my mother from a payphone. Her rant went something like this. "Jada, what the hell were you thinking? How dare you lie to me like that? And you had the nerve to have me drop your ass off at the train station. You need to come home now." Contrite, I said, "I'm sorry, Ma," and then went on to tell her how badly we wanted to experience what it was like to have a professional career like Josh. "Jada, get home." My mother was not having it, and she could have cared less about my reasoning. Her child was in New York with no supervision, and she had no way to get her arms around this situation other than to insist we immediately return to Baltimore. Corey's family had been contacted about our escapade too, and we were both in major trouble. Because it was already late, we were told to take the train home in the morning. For all my bravado, I'll never forget how scared I was to go back and face the righteous indignation that was to come. The wrath of Adrian met me at the train station. "Get your ass in the car." Adrian is pissed to this day. There is nothing like walking into a popping club when you are 15, 16 years old, no ID requested, and you feel like you own the spot. It's dark, it's moody, and all kinds of possibilities await. But my focus was the dance floor, and at Club Fantasy, as with other clubs like Signals, Godfrey's, and Odell's, the music was what made it. And these days, Baltimore had a very specific kind of house music. Local artists like Miss Tony, a drag queen, How You Wanna Curry It, Pull Your Guns Out, were big. Records like The Dominatrix Sleeps Tonight by Dominatrix, Dominatrix, or the classic It's Time for the Percolator, became collector's items. Hearing any of those joints always got me hyped for the dance battles. Once I arrived at a club, say, Fantasy, I'd be waved in. At most places, I knew everyone, from the bouncers to the owners to the bartenders, along with my homegirl Fawn, whom I met at my job at Merry-Go-Round. I'd go directly to the dance floor, which had already been taken hostage by some of the boldest dancers in the house. The floor was packed, battles underway, and I'd jump right in. Winners were determined by the crowd responses with calls of, "Ooh, damn, yo!" and a sound level that rose, the better you did. In the early days, they didn't see me coming. I was petite and considered tomboy cute in my pink hair, jabot baggy jeans, and a pair of fresh, clean white Reebok Princess sneakers. My style set me apart. On the floor, I had absolutely no fear or hesitation to go at all the boys who were dominating the battles. I'd whirl in with some of my hip-hop mixed with house moves, going from Running Man or the Cabbage Patch until I'd arch my back into some African moves that I learned at BSA, stomping my feet as my torso turned rapidly, twisting from right to left. As the crowd started to cheer, I'd throw in a little modern dance with a sprinkle of some pirouettes and finish with a bit of house footwork. And jokers trying to get one up on me were thrown. Even if my moves weren't always the best, I was a performer, and my showmanship was always hard to beat. Eventually, I earned a reputation as a formidable dance battle threat. Any chance I got to perform, I took it. Dance battles came hand in hand with lip sync competitions where I could pull off a damn good Prince impersonation, leading to local and even national talent shows. These were unforgettable good times. My greatest joy was found at the skating rink, Painter's Mill, where I practically lived for most of my high school years. They played everything from the SOS band with songs like Just Be Good to Me or Tell Me If You Still Care to the Gap band's Yearning for Your Love, which was a couples skate favorite. Then there was Michelle A's Something in My Heart. But nothing fills me with nostalgia more than a song by Keith Sweat called Make It Last Forever. Everything about that song is just so East Coast. It's summertime, it's young, wild, and free. I'm so grateful that my generation grew up in the early days of hip-hop. Rap music had always been about merging influences that weren't being represented in the mainstream. MCs had to bring an individual style to the mic, as well as clever rhymes. What I loved about hip-hop at the time was that it was an outlet for rebellion with an Afrocentric focus, which gave us education about our Black history that we weren't getting elsewhere. Our history education in school was a joke. For the most part, we weren't learning about our roots, about social injustices in our communities, or about our heritage and African civilizations. We couldn't even get the full scope of slavery, so we were left to the brilliant minds in hip-hop like Rakim, KRS-One, Public Enemy, Sister Soldier, the X-Clan, MC Lyte, Queen Latifah, Salt and Pepper, Sugar Hill Gang, Grandmaster Flash, Poor Righteous Teachers, and so on. They infused the culture with pride. Through their lyrics, rappers were also walking middle fingers to the systemic barriers that told us we were unworthy of equality and prosperity, and that resistance reverberated down our streets through our speakers. The messages were different depending on who was rapping, and the more individual you were in your presentation and delivery, the greater chance you had of cutting through a lot of competition. The women rappers who started coming to the fore in my teens were phenomenal. They could hold their own with any of the male rappers and then some. Their rhymes sent messages of female empowerment in contrast to the misogynistic messaging that would soon dominate hip-hop. They taught us to take ownership of our voices, our lives, and our bodies. On top of dope rhymes, we had dope style. Like most of us, I had a sneaker collection, and every pair was as pristine as the next. From there, I could rock a Russell sweatsuit with Reeboks that matched the color, or Fila sneaks with a Fila sweatsuit with my hair electric blue, before that was the thing to do. The side of my head shaved and a rat tail down on my ass, along with the complement of gold herringbone necklaces, nugget rings, bamboo earrings, and even small gold ropes around my ankles. But I had no problem rolling into the rink with a skirt over vertically sliced up jeans and a bleached denim jacket full of buttons with images of Prince, Madonna, and Duran Duran. Prince's style in dress and music was audacious and unapologetic from the start and made me a lifelong fan. And he was a masculine dude who wore makeup and high heels. His high-pitched whines and his screams contrasted with baritone vocals, a riveting combination. Just lip-syncing to songs like I Would Die For You or Let's Go Crazy was so much work. I could only imagine what it was like for him to actually perform them. Prince was one of my first artistic examples of the electrifying beauty of mixing different worlds and energies. He proved that they not only could mix, but were a necessary recipe to create something unique and different. These influences taught me that being fly wasn't just being pretty. Be a movement, a living, breathing testament. Not only was your art your life, but your life itself was the greatest masterpiece of all. How you walked through the world was as important as what you were creating. Trust and believe me when I tell you, I learned how to walk in the world and create an entrance. The clubs, skating rinks, and parties weren't only for fun and good times. They were also where I would meet some of the more learned professors of the University of the Bmore Streets. Baltimore was infested with every kind of drug, but heroin reigned. Starting in the 1970s, drugs had sent an avalanche of money into the predominantly black neighborhoods of every major city. It was also a time when legit jobs that used to support families, connecting communities, were vanishing. Major industries shutting down, leaving less opportunity for working class folks, young people, and so on. Many would turn to the drug business to make ends meet, or for a quick come-up, or even to support their own habit. There was so much product flooding urban neighborhoods that nearly everyone in them was connected, selling, buying, or using. In the mid-1980s, a cheaper form of coke, known as crack, which was easy and cheap to make and said to be far more addictive than cocaine itself, began to take hold in Baltimore. The idea that I could gain some financial freedom by selling drugs just seemed practical to me. To make a way for myself in a landscape where so many awful things were happening. With the distorted reality that I had, selling drugs was the norm and didn't seem as extreme as the horrors taking place every day. Like the time one of my homeboys was shot multiple times and left dead in the middle of the street from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. the next morning. I'll never forget the sound of his mother and sister wailing in the streets all night as they stood by his body. There's a certain kind of quiet that hits a place in the aftermath of murder, when the morgue is not willing to come to that part of town to retrieve the body of a young man stolen by violent bullets. Even the hood has its own way of mourning and paying its respect when its own is left to rot on the concrete under the midnight sky. This was real life, brutal and unfair. The best you could do was to win by any means necessary. Is that selfish? Yes. But that was survival. When you live in an environment where you are seen as unworthy and you feel unworthy, you are going to treat others that way too. These kind of dog-eat-dog conditions can turn anyone selfish, which could make selling drugs simply part of the game of life. This was my way to financial stability and mobility. I wasn't going to become a hustler's girlfriend. I had seen with my own eyes the level of control and enslavement that came from being financially dependent on a man. Some of the girls in my circle looked to their drug dealer boyfriends to give them places to stay, cars, jewelry, and clothes so they could have a better life, but at the cost of enduring cycles of betrayal and abuse that were unthinkable to me. Fuck that. If anyone was going to give me the trappings of the good life, it was going to be me. I came to the conclusion that I could be as successful a drug dealer as any man. In my view, I could work my way to running a whole operation, be a queen pin. The fact is, I didn't want my hands tied by no dude, and I surely didn't want my hands tied because of the system. A generation earlier, the strivers became doctors and lawyers like my grandfathers and Tony. Now the most successful people in my hood were drug dealers. They had the life we all wanted. If you were strong enough and if you could survive, it could be yours too. Those attitudes collided with my growing concerns about being left to fend for myself should something happen to my mother. My Aunt Karen was worried enough about this that at one point, she asked my mother for guardianship should Adrian overdose or worse. In these years, Mom did try at times to get clean. She would go to rehab and get sober, but staying clean was another story. Before long, she was back to using. My need for vigilance at home kicked into high gear as my mother became more and more unreliable. My Aunt Karen had also been an addict but had kicked the habit and stayed clean. A key to her sobriety was attending NA meetings. In fact, it was in those same meeting rooms where Robsell found the support he needed to stay clean after he came back to Baltimore from California in the mid-1980s. When I worried that my mother would never reach her bottom and stop using for good, I found faith in the 12-step rooms and the testimonies of people who had come through hell on earth by the grace of God. Their stories were seemingly unredemptive. Some had lost their families, their jobs, and their homes, even sold their children for drugs. Yet in those rooms I saw the miraculous power of God to help the most powerless find redemption, love, and forgiveness, and begin their lives anew. These testimonies gave me hope that Adrian and I would be okay. But after feeling hopeful and then being let down again and again, you just get numb, and you stop allowing yourself to feel anything other than apathetic. One day when I was at my part-time gig at Merry-Go-Round, my mom came in so high I couldn't believe she had managed to drive to the store without an accident. She wanted to put a leather trench coat on layaway so she could give it to me for my birthday. I had never felt embarrassed in public by her, but when she started talking to the dude who ran the store, whom she knew and who had come over to say hi, and nodded off standing upright, I felt that shame. "Ma," I shook her arm. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath, reached into her purse for the cash to put down for the coat on layaway, and made an excuse that she was tired after a long night at the hospital. Nobody said anything to me after she left. I made no effort to explain what we had just witnessed. We all knew what it was, and there wasn't one person in that store who hadn't been touched by the epidemic of addiction. Although I knew I wasn't alone, it didn't make the moment any less painful. Seeing her condition in the isolation of our home gave a false sense of normalcy, but in public, I could not ignore the severity of my mother's addiction. It was clear that something was really wrong with her, with me, with us. My resentment didn't surface until an incident with one of Mom's boyfriends. Adrian had always been careful about bringing the men in her life home, especially after her divorce. That changed when she started seeing Anthony, the definitive, tall, dark, and handsome type, who also happened to be a full-blown heroin addict. He was at our house often, and eventually, things started going missing. Between Adrian and me, in terms of jewelry, clothes, and cash, we were a decent lick for someone who knew where to look. Otherwise, the narrow 3-story row house was no invitation to a thief. It had doors that closed only when wedged with newspapers. A kitchen with a dirty, stained, yellow linoleum floor, which never improved no matter how much you scrubbed it. Rusted metal cabinets we never wanted to store food in. Wood floors in need of replacement, and barely any furniture. It wasn't so much a home as a place to lay your head. The door to my bedroom didn't even have a doorknob, let alone a way to lock it. At one point, a shopping bag full of new clothes and some money of mine disappeared, and my mother mentioned that she couldn't find a necklace of my grandmother's that she shared with my Aunt Karen. Our next-door neighbors informed my mother that they had seen Anthony climb through my bedroom window to enter the house and leave with some items. My mother confronted Anthony, and he confessed to stealing from us in order to cop some drugs. My mother felt terrible. She made Anthony apologize to me. But what broke my heart was that my mother felt because he had apologized, it was okay to let him back into the house. Feeling angry, unprotected, and disregarded, I was shocked. My space had been violated. If I couldn't be safe in my own home, then I wasn't safe anywhere. And that was the second that I decided I needed even more control over my life. Whatever money he took and clothes he stole, I could get it back. No problem, I thought. I'm not going to trip. It was this incident that not only justified why I sold drugs, but ramped it up. Why? Because I wanted out. I didn't want to be part of this, but I couldn't abandon my mother. That's a hell of a conflict. I only vaguely recall how I started slinging dope. I do remember that there were a lot of hustlers at the skating rink, and I started making connections there with the lower level dudes whose egos were waiting to be stroked. I caught my first fish on some I need a mentor-ish. Someone to show me the ropes because I needed to make some money. At first, M, we'll call him M, asked if I wanted to make a drop for him. I told him, nah, you should give me something on the arm, and if I do right by it, we'll take it from there. I knew I didn't want to be a mule. I didn't want to put myself in a position where a dude had his boot on my neck. Mules never called the shots. I wanted to call shots. M smirked and stared at me for a minute. I don't think he took me seriously, but he wanted to humor me and himself. Finally, he laughed. All right, shorty. He gave me a little something to get started. Before long, I worked my way up to BP. We'll call him BP. He was a handsome mid-level hustler who taught me how to use a gun and how to look out for myself, and later helped me set up a spot in Cherry Hill where I could sell dope out of a first-floor apartment window. I was soon introduced to Chet, who was making his way to kingpin status and would eventually serve 10 years in the penitentiary. The first thing Chet taught me was how to be on the low, as in no flashy cars, jewelry, none of that. The second thing was to always have a legit job. The third, I needed a plan. Being fashionably late to sophomore year orientation for the theater department was my intention. Another way to make an entrance. We were required to report to the massive performing hall at Baltimore School for the Arts. An imposing room, it was memorable for its super high ceilings and a stage built from beautiful dark wood. As I saunter in with my new extended rat tail down to my butt crack, I immediately catch eyes with a new dude across the room who is engaged in a very energetic conversation with one of our classmates. He's wearing a thick old school alpaca sweater and jeans. He has beautiful brown skin with big brown eyes, heavy eyebrows, and a tiny peanut head. The minute I turn and notice him, he's already staring at me. Me catching his eyes gives him the gumption to walk across the room and come right to me. Boldly, he smiles a big old smile, showing off his big old teeth, and puts out his hand to shake mine. Hi, he says. I'm Tupac. I'm struck by the power of that unusual name, Tupac. His smile will become an unforgettable feature. 1,000,000 watts of white teeth, and his hands feeling strikingly clammy, becoming an ongoing joke between us for the duration of our friendship. The power of his presence lets me know right away that he is something special. I'm Jada, I smile back. Nice to meet you, Tupac. Hi, Jada, he says. From the gate, Pac was an undeniable charismatic who could captivate any room, peanut head or not. He hadn't yet told me his story, or that he was already making moves as a 15-year-old rapper to be the next Rakim, or that he had serious acting chops. But I would soon find out all of that, and so much more. What I didn't expect, even with the uniqueness of his vibe, was that this young man and I would create a bond that would impact my life forever. Chaos in the midst of chaos isn't funny, but chaos in the midst of order is. Steve Martin. Many of us who were raised in environments of chaos as children become addicted to that chaos. These cycles of chaos will seem so normal that we won't recognize how we are attracted and make consistent choices that keep us mired in disorder. For many of us, the trappings of chaos seem so familiar, so right, that we can't even recognize the warnings when they make a blaring appearance. Such cycles can mislead us into believing that the adrenaline, the roller coaster ride of emotions, the merry-go-round of pain is living. The truth is, we can't tell up from down when we're on this kind of high. And when we're not, we're miserable. If we're lucky, we hit rock bottom, worn out from the chaotic drama, confusion, and danger we're inviting into our lives. We have a choice, but we must be patient. We have cultivated this way of life for a very, very long time. And for most, we can't change overnight. Sometimes to create that change, it takes surveying the past and identifying the origins of our chaos in order to recognize it in our present circumstances and be willing to take personal responsibility for bringing the past forward. Is there any aspect of your life at the moment that reflects an addiction to chaos? Does part of your life feel unmanageable and out of control? Do you seek the thrill of the roller coaster? It can be so helpful to look at what keeps you hooked on chaos, perhaps as a way to make yourself feel strong and valued for your ability to withstand. When you're willing to name that cause, it loses its power